What if I told you that the man who brought down $1 billion conspiracy was the same person executives stepped around like he was part of the furniture? What if the most devastating corporate scandal in recent history was uncovered not by federal investigators, not by investigative journalists, but by someone so invisible that security guards forgot to check his credentials? Picture this. A boardroom full of powerful executives scrambling to cover their tracks, desperately trying to silence whistleblowers and destroy evidence, while 50 floors below them, a night janitor quietly backs up files that will end their careers forever. Marcus Rivera had mastered the art of being a ghost. At 52, he moved through the gleaming corridors of Apex Financial Tower like smoke, his grey uniform blending seamlessly with the shadows cast by floor-to-ceiling windows. His cart rolled silently across marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people made in a month, and his keys jingled so softly that even the security cameras seemed to forget he existed. For 8 years, Marcus had cleaned these offices, emptied these trash cans, and listened to conversations that would make front-page headlines, all while remaining completely invisible to the people whose secrets surrounded him like confetti. But Marcus had a secret that none of the executives at Apex Financial knew about. Every night after his cleaning shift ended at 3 a.m., he would take the service elevator to the basement level and walk through a secured door that led to a small room most people assumed was storage. There, surrounded by computer monitors and communication equipment that looked like it belonged in a military command center, Marcus would transform from invisible janitor to the most connected intelligence analyst most people had never heard of. You see, Marcus Rivera wasn't just any janitor. He was a former Army intelligence specialist who had spent 12 years analyzing enemy communications in Afghanistan and Iraq. He spoke 3 languages fluently, could read body language like a roadmap, and possessed the kind of observational skills that intelligence agencies spent millions trying to teach their operatives. But more importantly, Marcus understood something that most people never learned. The most valuable information in the world wasn't found in secured databases or classified documents. It was scattered in the trash cans, whispered in supposedly empty hallways, and carelessly discussed in elevators that people assumed were private. Marcus had discovered early in his janitorial career that wealthy executives treated service workers like living furniture. They would discuss merger strategies while he emptied their trash. They would argue about illegal offshore accounts while he cleaned their windows. They would plan market manipulation schemes while he vacuumed around their feet, never once considering that the quiet man with the mop might understand exactly what they were talking about, or worse, that he might remember every single word. The transition from military intelligence to corporate janitor hadn't been voluntary. Marcus had returned from his final deployment with what the VA called severe adjustment disorder, but what he knew was simply the inability to pretend that civilian problems mattered after watching friends die for causes that changed depending on which politician was speaking. He had tried office jobs, security work, even teaching, but every environment felt suffocating after the clarity of military life. Cleaning offices at night offered him the solitude he craved, the invisibility he needed, and the low-pressure environment that didn't trigger the hypervigilance that made normal social interactions feel like combat operations. But Marcus had brought more than just trauma back from his service. He had brought skills that most janitors didn't possess, instincts that made him notice things that others missed, and a moral compass that had been calibrated by watching what happened when good people stayed silent while bad people gained power. He couldn't turn off the part of his brain that analyzed patterns, recorded inconsistencies, and filed away information that might become important later. It was like having a supercomputer running constantly in the background of his consciousness, cataloging every conversation, every document, every detail that suggested something wasn't quite right. 3 years into his job at Apex Financial, Marcus had realized that he wasn't just cleaning offices. He was conducting surveillance on one of the most corrupt financial institutions in the country. The executives who ignored his presence were discussing crimes that would devastate millions of investors, manipulating markets that controlled retirement funds, and laundering money for organizations that Marcus recognized from his intelligence briefings overseas. He was watching a criminal enterprise operate in plain sight, protected by expensive suits and corporate respectability. At first, Marcus had told himself it wasn't his problem. He had done his service to his country. He had paid his dues fighting other people's wars and cleaning up other people's mistakes. He deserved to live quietly, earn his paycheck, and avoid the kind of complications that came with challenging, powerful people. But the longer he worked at Apex Financial, the more impossible it became to ignore what he was seeing. Marcus remembered the exact moment when passive observation became active resistance. It was a Tuesday night in March when he was cleaning the executive conference room on the 47th floor. The room still smelled like expensive cologne and fear sweat from whatever meeting had taken place earlier that evening. As Marcus emptied the trash cans, he noticed that someone had accidentally left behind a tablet computer, the kind that executives used for presentations and sensitive communications. Marcus had been trained never to leave unsecured devices unattended, even in civilian environments. It was a security protocol that had been drilled into him during countless briefings about operational security and intelligence gathering. His first instinct was to turn the tablet over to building security, but something made him pause. The device was still active, displaying an email chain that made his blood run cold. The emails were between 3 Apex Financial executives and a contact identified only as Phoenix. The messages discussed something called Operation Blackwater, which appeared to be a scheme to manipulate currency markets in developing countries, causing economic instability that would allow Apex and its partners to acquire assets at severely reduced prices. The human cost of these manipulations was discussed with the same casual indifference that Marcus had seen commanders use when calculating acceptable casualty rates. Marcus had seen enough warfare to recognize a battle plan when he read one, and this was a financial war being waged against entire populations who would never know they were under attack. The emails contained references to accelerated poverty metrics and population displacement optimization, language that made Marcus's stomach turn, because he understood exactly what those euphemisms meant in practical terms. As Marcus read through the email chain, he realized that Operation Blackwater wasn't just theoretical. It was already being implemented in 3 African countries and 2 South American nations. The economic chaos that news networks were attributing to natural market forces and political instability was actually the result of coordinated financial attacks designed to transfer wealth from vulnerable populations to Apex Financial and its corporate partners. Marcus photographed every email on the tablet using a technique he had learned for documenting enemy communications. His hands were steady, despite the rage building in his chest, and his mind was already working through the implications of what he had discovered. This wasn't just corporate fraud or white-collar crime. This was economic warfare being conducted against civilian populations, the kind of operation that intelligence agencies would classify as a crime against humanity if it were being conducted by a hostile foreign government. After documenting the emails, Marcus carefully placed the tablet exactly where he had found it and continued his cleaning routine. To any observer, he would have appeared to be doing exactly what he was paid to do, emptying trash cans and maintaining the pristine appearance that Apex Financial's executives demanded. But internally, Marcus was processing the discovery with The systematic approach he had used to analyze enemy intelligence during his military service. The first question was verification. Intelligence operatives were trained never to act on single-source information, no matter how compelling it appeared. Marcus needed to confirm that what he had seen was accurate and ongoing, not just theoretical planning or abandoned proposals. The second question was scope. How extensive was Operation Blackwater, and how many people within Apex Financial were involved in its planning and implementation? The third question was timing. When would these operations escalate, and how much? Damage would they cause before someone with the authority to stop them became aware of their existence? Over the following weeks, Marcus began what he privately called Operation Transparency, a systematic intelligence-gathering effort designed to map the full extent of Apex Financial's illegal activities. He used his access to executive floors and his invisible status to collect information with the same methodical precision he had once applied to tracking terrorist networks. He photographed documents left on desks, recorded conversations using equipment that most people assumed was standard maintenance gear, and built detailed profiles of every executive who appeared to be involved in criminal activities. Marcus discovered that Operation Blackwater was just one component of a much larger criminal enterprise. Apex Financial was also engaged in systematic money laundering for drug cartels, arms dealers, and human trafficking organizations. They were manipulating stock prices through coordinated disinformation campaigns, bribing government officials in at least 12 countries, and using their position as a major financial institution to facilitate crimes that Marcus recognized from his intelligence work as threats to national security. The scope of the corruption was staggering, but what troubled Marcus most was the casual efficiency with which these crimes were being conducted. The executives at Apex Financial discussed destroying lives and destabilizing governments with the same tone they used to plan corporate holiday parties. They had become so insulated from the consequences of their actions that human suffering had become just another variable in their profit calculations. Marcus had been trained to maintain operational security under extreme pressure, but gathering intelligence on Apex Financial while maintaining his cover as a simple janitor was testing skills he hadn't used since his deployment days. He had to be constantly aware of security cameras, motion sensors, and the unpredictable schedules of executives who sometimes returned to the office at unusual hours. He had to memorize details that he couldn't write down, photograph documents without leaving any trace of his presence, and process information that would have challenged intelligence analysts with access to sophisticated computer systems and support teams. But Marcus had advantages that traditional intelligence operatives didn't possess. His military training had taught him patience, persistence, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. His janitorial position gave him legitimate access to every floor of the building, every office, and every piece of equipment that might contain useful information. Most importantly, his invisible status meant that he could gather intelligence without anyone questioning his presence or wondering about his motivations. As the evidence accumulated, Marcus realized that he was facing the same kind of moral choice that had defined his military service. He could continue collecting information indefinitely, building an ever more complete picture of Apex Financial's criminal activities, while the people being victimized by those activities continued to suffer. Or he could find a way to expose what he had learned, knowing that doing so would end his invisibility and potentially put his life at risk. Marcus thought about the villages in Afghanistan, where he had seen what happened when good people failed to act against corruption and violence. He remembered the faces of civilians who had been caught in conflicts they didn't understand, fighting wars they hadn't chosen, suffering consequences they didn't deserve. The executives at Apex Financial were creating the same kind of suffering on a global scale, using financial weapons instead of military ones, but causing damage that was just as real and just as devastating. The decision crystallized for Marcus. On a Thursday night in June, when he was cleaning the office of Victoria Chen, Apex Financial's chief operations officer. Chen had left her computer unlocked, displaying a video conference with someone identified as Asset Recovery Team Leader. Marcus listened as Chen discussed accelerated liquidation protocols for what she called non-performing population centers, corporate terminology for abandoning disaster relief efforts in areas where Apex Financial had contributed to economic collapse. The conversation included casualty projections that Chen discussed with the same emotional detachment that Marcus had heard military strategists use when planning operations in hostile territory. But these weren't enemy combatants being discussed. These were civilian populations that included children, elderly people, and families who were suffering because of financial manipulations they would never understand. Marcus realized that his intelligence gathering had reached the point where continued inaction made him complicit in the crimes he was documenting. He had enough evidence to expose Operation Blackwater and the broader criminal enterprise that surrounded it, but he also knew that presenting this information would require him to reveal how he had obtained it. He would have to abandon his invisibility, acknowledge his intelligence background, and accept whatever consequences came with challenging one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. That night, Marcus made a decision that would transform him from invisible observer to the most dangerous man in Apex Financial's corporate empire. He would find a way to expose everything he had learned, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet anonymity that had protected him since his return from military service. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus Rivera was going to make himself visible, and the people who had treated him like furniture were about to discover exactly what they had been ignoring all along. The discovery that would change everything happened on a rainy Thursday night in October, during what should have been Marcus's routine cleaning of the executive floors. He had been working methodically through the 49th floor, the domain of Apex Financial's senior leadership, when he noticed something unusual near the elevator bank. A small silver USB drive lay partially hidden beneath a decorative plant, as if someone had dropped it while rushing to catch an elevator. Marcus had seen hundreds of similar devices during his intelligence career, and his training immediately kicked in. Unsecured storage devices were potential security threats in any environment, but in a building like Apex Financial Tower, they could contain information worth millions of dollars or evidence of crimes that could topple governments. His first instinct was operational caution, but something about the device's location suggested it hadn't been dropped accidentally. The USB drive was positioned in a spot where it would be invisible to security cameras, but easily accessible to someone who knew where to look. Marcus recognized the placement pattern from his military experience with dead drops and intelligence transfers. Someone had deliberately left this device for a specific person to find, which meant it contained information that couldn't be transmitted through normal communication channels. Marcus pocketed the device and continued his cleaning routine, but his mind was racing through possibilities. The executive floors of Apex Financial were restricted access areas where only the most senior executives and their assistants were allowed. Anyone with legitimate business on this floor would have secure methods for transferring sensitive information. The only reason to use a physical device hidden in a public area would be if the information was too dangerous to transmit electronically, or if the person leaving it didn't trust Apex Financial's internal security systems. After completing his Shift. Marcus returned to his basement workspace and connected the USB drive to an isolated computer system he had built for analyzing potentially dangerous files. His military training had taught him never to insert unknown devices into networked systems, and his intelligence background had given him the technical skills to examine suspicious files safely. The USB drive contained a single encrypted folder, labeled Phoenix Protocols. Marcus recognized the name from the emails he had discovered months earlier, but accessing the encrypted files would require skills that went beyond his military training. Fortunately, Marcus had spent his post-service years learning advanced computer security techniques, partly out of intellectual curiosity and partly because he understood that information warfare was becoming as important as traditional military conflict. Breaking the encryption took Marcus 3 days of intensive work, using techniques he had learned from online security communities and adapting methods he remembered from his intelligence training. When he finally accessed the files, he discovered that he was looking at the operational center of the largest financial conspiracy in modern history. The Phoenix Protocols contained detailed documentation of Operation Blackwater and 6 other criminal enterprises that Apex Financial was coordinating with partners across the global financial system. The files included communication logs, financial transaction records, and strategic planning documents that mapped out a systematic effort to destabilize economies, manipulate markets, and transfer wealth from vulnerable populations to a network of corrupt financial institutions. But the most shocking discovery was a series of audio recordings that had been automatically backed up from executive conference calls. The recordings captured Apex Financial's senior leadership discussing their operations with the casual brutality that Marcus had once heard from enemy commanders planning attacks on civilian targets. They talked about population displacement optimization and asset recovery acceleration, as if they were discussing quarterly sales projections, not strategies that would cause mass starvation and economic collapse. The recordings revealed that CEO Jonathan Prescott was the primary architect of these operations, working with a network of international partners to coordinate financial attacks that would benefit their institutions while devastating target populations. Prescott's voice was calm and methodical as he described plans to manipulate currency values in developing nations, crash agricultural commodity markets to force small farmers into bankruptcy, and use economic chaos to acquire strategic resources at severely reduced prices. Marcus listened to hours of these recordings, his military-trained mind automatically cataloging evidence and building organizational charts that mapped the conspiracy's structure. But what disturbed him most wasn't the scope of the criminal enterprise or even the casual cruelty of its planning. It was the realization that these operations were already being implemented, causing real suffering for millions of people who would never understand why their lives were being destroyed. The Phoenix Protocols included progress reports that detailed the success metrics of ongoing operations. Economic instability in sub-Saharan Africa had forced 2.3 million people from their homes, creating refugee populations that Apex Financial's partners were exploiting for cheap labor. Currency manipulation in South America had destroyed the savings of 8.7 million families, creating desperate sellers who were being forced to liquidate assets at a fraction of their value. Agricultural market manipulation had contributed to food insecurity affecting 15 million people, driving up commodity prices in wealthy nations while creating starvation conditions in developing countries. Marcus realized that he was looking at documentation of crimes against humanity being conducted through financial mechanisms rather than traditional military force. The Phoenix Protocols represented a form of economic warfare that was every bit as devastating as conventional conflicts, but with the advantage of being nearly invisible to victims and investigators alike. The files also revealed why someone had left the USB drive where Marcus could find it. The Phoenix Protocols contained internal communications showing that several Apex financial executives were planning to expose the conspiracy to federal investigators, not out of conscience, but because they believed they could negotiate immunity deals by providing evidence against their colleagues. The USB drive had been created by someone within the conspiracy who was preparing to betray their partners before their partners could betray them. Marcus discovered that the device had been created by Sarah Kim, Apex Financial's chief technology officer, who had apparently grown concerned about the legal and operational risks of the Phoenix Protocols. Kim's internal communications showed that she had been documenting evidence for months, building a comprehensive case file that she planned to deliver to federal prosecutors in exchange for witness protection and immunity from prosecution. But Kim's plans had been discovered by CEO Jonathan Prescott, who had ordered her immediate termination and the destruction of all evidence related to her documentation efforts. The USB drive represented Kim's insurance policy, hidden evidence that she could use to protect herself if Prescott tried to eliminate her as a potential witness. Unfortunately for Kim, Prescott's response had been more direct than she anticipated. The final files on the USB drive were email exchanges between Prescott and someone identified only as cleanup specialist, discussing arrangements for what they called permanent risk mitigation regarding Sarah Kim. Marcus's intelligence background allowed him to decode the euphemisms immediately. Kim wasn't just being fired, she was being targeted for assassination to prevent her from exposing the Phoenix Protocols. Marcus realized that he was holding evidence of an active murder plot against someone who had tried to expose the same criminal conspiracy that he had been investigating independently. Kim's life was in immediate danger, and the evidence she had gathered represented the only comprehensive documentation of crimes that were affecting millions of people worldwide. But Marcus also understood that Kim's situation was a trap that could destroy anyone who tried to help her. Prescott and his co-conspirators controlled massive financial resources, had connections throughout government and law enforcement, and had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence to protect their operations. Anyone who attempted to expose the Phoenix Protocols would become a target for the same risk mitigation that Kim was facing. Marcus spent the next 48 hours analyzing the situation with the strategic thinking he had developed during his military service. The Phoenix Protocols represented a clear and present danger to global financial stability and human welfare, but exposing them would require more than just presenting evidence to authorities. Prescott and his network had too much influence over traditional law enforcement and regulatory agencies. They could suppress investigations, discredit witnesses, and eliminate threats using resources that governments couldn't match. The key to defeating the conspiracy wasn't just gathering evidence. It was finding a way to present that evidence in a manner that couldn't be suppressed or discredited. Marcus needed to create a situation where Prescott and his co-conspirators couldn't use their influence to control the narrative or eliminate witnesses. He needed to make the evidence public in a way that would force immediate action from multiple oversight agencies simultaneously. Marcus realized that his invisible status within Apex Financial gave him unique advantages for conducting this kind of operation. He could gather additional evidence without arousing suspicion, monitor the conspiracy's response to his actions, and coordinate his exposure efforts with other potential witnesses who might be willing to come forward if they believed They would be protected. More importantly, Marcus understood that his military training had prepared him for exactly this kind of asymmetric conflict. He was a single operative working against a powerful enemy that controlled significant resources and had demonstrated willingness to use violence. But he also had advantages that traditional intelligence operatives rarely possessed. Complete access to the enemy's operational environment, detailed knowledge of their plans and capabilities, and the element of surprise that came from being consistently underestimated. Marcus began planning what he privately called Operation Spotlight, a comprehensive strategy for exposing the Phoenix protocols while protecting potential witnesses and ensuring that the evidence couldn't be suppressed. The operation would require him to coordinate with journalists, law enforcement agencies, and international regulatory bodies simultaneously, creating a situation where Prescott's network couldn't control all the variables at once. But first, Marcus had to deal with the immediate threat to Sarah Kim's life. The Phoenix protocols indicated that the permanent risk mitigation was scheduled to occur within 72 hours during a business trip that Kim was taking to their Singapore office. Marcus realized that he had less than 3 days to prevent a murder while simultaneously preparing to expose a global financial conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that after 8 years of perfecting invisibility, he was about to undertake the most visible action of his entire life. But he also understood that this was why he had survived his military service and found himself in this position. Some battles chose their soldiers, and the war against the Phoenix protocols had chosen a night janitor with the skills of an intelligence operative and the moral compass of someone who had seen what happened when good people failed to act against evil. Marcus opened his encrypted communication system and began reaching out to contacts he hadn't spoken with since his military service. It was time to call in old favors, activate dormant networks, and remind the world that some veterans never really stopped fighting for justice. The executives at Apex Financial were about to discover that the invisible man they had ignored for 8 years was actually the most dangerous enemy they had ever faced. Marcus knew that saving Sarah Kim's life would require resources and connections that he couldn't access through normal channels. The Phoenix protocols had made it clear that Kim's business trip to Singapore was actually a carefully orchestrated assassination designed to look like an accident or random crime. Marcus had 72 hours to prevent a murder while avoiding detection by people who controlled vast surveillance networks and had unlimited financial resources. The first person Marcus contacted was Elena Vasquez, a former Army intelligence colleague who now worked as an independent cybersecurity consultant for international human rights organizations. Elena had been the best signals intelligence analyst in their unit, capable of intercepting and decoding enemy communications that other operatives couldn't even locate. More importantly, she had maintained her security clearance and her connections within the intelligence community after leaving military service. Marcus reached Elena through an encrypted messaging system they had used during their deployment, a communication method that would be invisible to anyone monitoring standard internet traffic. His message was brief and coded in language that would be meaningless to outsiders, but immediately recognizable to someone with their shared operational background. Phoenix rising, Blackwater flowing, Singapore sunset in 72, need Overwatch. Elena's response came within 6 hours. Copy your traffic. Phoenix is known quantity. Blackwater confirmed hostile. Singapore has friendly assets. Overwatch authorized. Marcus felt a surge of relief that surprised him with its intensity. Elena's message confirmed that other intelligence professionals were aware of the Phoenix conspiracy and that Sarah Kim's planned assassination was on their radar. More importantly, Elena had resources in Singapore that could provide protection for Kim without revealing the source of the threat information. But Marcus also understood that preventing Kim's murder was only the first step in a much larger operation. The Phoenix Protocols represented ongoing crimes that were affecting millions of people, and exposing them would require more than just protecting a single witness. Marcus needed to build a comprehensive strategy that would simultaneously reveal the conspiracy, protect potential victims, and ensure that the evidence couldn't be suppressed by Prescott's network of corrupt officials. The second contact Marcus made was to David Chen, an investigative journalist who specialized in financial crimes and had built a reputation for taking on powerful corporate interests. Chen worked for a consortium of international news organizations that could publish stories simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions, making it difficult for any single government or corporate entity to suppress information through legal threats or political pressure. Marcus had first encountered Chen's work while researching Apex Financial's background, and he had been impressed by the journalist's ability to trace complex financial transactions and present evidence in ways that ordinary people could understand. More importantly, Chen had a track record of protecting sources and maintaining operational security, even when facing intense pressure from corporate legal teams and government agencies. Reaching Chen required more subtlety than contacting Elena. Marcus couldn't use military communication channels to contact a civilian journalist, and he couldn't risk exposing his identity through normal journalistic channels. Instead, Marcus created an anonymous digital identity and began leaving carefully crafted comments on Chen's published articles. Comments that contained coded references to specific financial transactions that only someone with inside knowledge of Apex Financial could know. The strategy worked exactly as Marcus had hoped. Chen recognized that someone with extraordinary access to Apex Financial's internal operations was trying to make contact, and he responded by publishing an article about financial transparency that contained coded instructions for secure communication. Within 48 hours, Marcus was communicating with Chen through an encrypted system that protected both of their identities while allowing them to exchange detailed information. Chen's response to the Phoenix Protocols was immediate and intense. As an investigative journalist who had spent years documenting financial crimes, he understood the significance of what Marcus had discovered. The Phoenix Protocols represented the kind of systematic criminal enterprise that journalists dreamed of exposing, but they also represented the kind of story that could destroy anyone who tried to tell it without adequate protection. This is bigger than Enron, bigger than the 2008 financial crisis, bigger than anything I've ever seen, Chen wrote in one of his encrypted messages. But the people involved have resources that make normal investigative work impossible. We need to coordinate with law enforcement agencies that have the authority to provide witness protection and the independence to resist political pressure. Chen's analysis confirmed Marcus's understanding of the operational challenges they faced. The Phoenix Protocols implicated senior executives at multiple financial institutions, government officials in at least 12 countries, and regulatory agencies that were supposed to prevent exactly the kind of crimes they were facilitating. Exposing the conspiracy would require more than just journalistic investigation. It would require a coordinated law enforcement response that could operate across international boundaries and resist corruption attempts. The third contact Marcus made was to FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, someone he had worked with during a joint military-civilian operation that had targeted terrorist financing networks in the Middle East. Martinez now headed the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and she had both the authority and the independence necessary to investigate the Phoenix Protocols without political interference. Contacting Martinez required the most careful approach of all. As a federal law enforcement officer, she was bound by strict protocols regarding evidence handling and source protection. Marcus couldn't simply hand over the Phoenix protocols and expect her to act on information that had been obtained through unauthorized surveillance. He needed to find a way to guide her investigation toward the evidence, without compromising his own legal position or revealing how he had gained access to classified information. Marcus decided to use a technique he had learned during his intelligence training called parallel construction. Instead of providing Martinez with the actual Phoenix protocols, he would give her enough information to begin her own independent investigation that would naturally lead to the same evidence. This approach would protect Marcus from prosecution, while ensuring that any evidence Martinez discovered would be legally admissible in court. Marcus began by sending Martinez anonymous tips about unusual financial transactions that he had identified through the Phoenix protocols, but which could also be discovered through normal regulatory monitoring. The tips were carefully crafted to look like they came from a concerned bank employee or financial analyst, not from someone with access to classified conspiracy documents. Martinez's response was swift and professional. Within days, Marcus could see evidence of increased FBI surveillance around Apex Financial, monitoring activities that suggested a major investigation was beginning. Marcus realized that Martinez had immediately recognized the significance of his tips and was building a comprehensive case file that would eventually encompass the entire Phoenix conspiracy. But Marcus also understood that law enforcement investigations move slowly, and Sarah Kim didn't have time to wait for the FBI to build a case against her potential assassins. He needed to coordinate multiple operations simultaneously, protecting Kim in the short term, building evidence for long-term prosecutions, and ensuring that the Phoenix protocols were exposed in a way that would prevent their suppression by corrupt officials. The solution came from an unexpected source. Marcus received an encrypted message from Elena indicating that Sarah Kim had contacted a former colleague who worked for an international anti-corruption organization. Kim apparently suspected that her life was in danger and had been quietly reaching out to potential allies who might be able to protect her from Apex Financial's retaliation. "Target is aware of threat and seeking protection," Elena's message read. "Has valuable intelligence regarding Phoenix operations. Requesting extraction assistance for Singapore operation. Can provide coordination." Marcus realized that Kim's awareness of the threat actually simplified his operational planning. Instead of trying to protect someone who didn't know they were in danger, he could coordinate directly with Kim to ensure her safety while simultaneously using her cooperation to gather additional evidence against the Phoenix conspiracy. Marcus arranged a secure communication channel with Kim through Elena's anti-corruption contacts. The initial exchange was cautious on both sides, with Kim uncertain about trusting an anonymous contact, and Marcus careful not to reveal too much about his own background or capabilities. But once Kim understood that Marcus had access to the complete Phoenix protocols and was working to expose the conspiracy, she became an enthusiastic collaborator. Kim provided Marcus with access codes and security information that allowed him to gather additional evidence from Apex Financial's internal systems. She also revealed the existence of other executives who were planning to cooperate with federal investigators, information that helped Marcus coordinate his exposure strategy with ongoing law enforcement efforts. More importantly, Kim provided operational intelligence about Prescott's security arrangements and response capabilities. As Apex Financial's former chief technology officer, she understood their surveillance systems, communication networks, and crisis management protocols. This information allowed Marcus to plan his evidence exposure in ways that would minimize Prescott's ability to suppress information or retaliate against witnesses. The collaboration with Kim also revealed the true scope of Marcus's advantages over traditional investigators. As an invisible janitor with military intelligence training, he had access to information and environments that no other investigator could penetrate. Kim's technical knowledge combined with Marcus's operational access created an intelligence-gathering capability that even federal agencies would struggle to match. Marcus began using Kim's security codes to access executive computer systems and communication networks that were supposedly secure from outside surveillance. His janitorial access allowed him to install monitoring equipment in conference rooms and private offices, creating a comprehensive surveillance network that captured real-time intelligence about the conspiracy's operations and response plans. The information Marcus gathered through this enhanced surveillance capability was staggering in its scope and implications. The Phoenix protocols were even more extensive than the original USB drive had indicated, encompassing criminal activities in more than 30 countries and involving financial institutions that controlled trillions of dollars in global assets. Marcus discovered that Prescott and his co-conspirators were planning to accelerate their operations in response to Kim's defection, implementing contingency protocols that would cause massive economic disruption while allowing them to escape with their stolen assets. The conspiracy wasn't just ongoing, it was escalating toward a finale that would cause unprecedented global financial chaos. The revelation of these acceleration plans forced Marcus to revise his exposure strategy completely. He couldn't afford to wait for careful, methodical investigation and prosecution. The Phoenix conspiracy was approaching a crisis point where delayed action would result in catastrophic consequences for millions of people worldwide. Marcus realized that he was facing the same kind of tactical decision that had defined his military career, the choice between safe, conventional approaches and high-risk operations that offered the only realistic chance of success. The Phoenix conspiracy had grown too large and too powerful for normal investigative methods. It required the kind of asymmetric response that intelligence operatives used against enemies who controlled superior resources and conventional advantages. Marcus began planning what he privately called Operation Full Disclosure, a coordinated assault on the Phoenix conspiracy that would expose their crimes simultaneously through multiple channels while providing protection for witnesses and ensuring that evidence couldn't be suppressed. The operation would require precise timing, extensive coordination, and a level of risk that would have challenged experienced intelligence teams. But Marcus also understood that this was exactly the kind of mission that his training and experience had prepared him for. He wasn't just a janitor who had stumbled across evidence of corporate crime. He was a veteran intelligence operative who had found himself in the perfect position to conduct the most important operation of his career. The war against the Phoenix conspiracy was about to begin, and Marcus Rivera was finally ready to stop being invisible. The crisis that would test everything Marcus had built came on a Monday morning in November when CEO Jonathan Prescott called an emergency executive meeting that would change the trajectory of the entire conspiracy. Marcus was cleaning the 47th floor conference room when the building's most powerful executives began filing in with expressions of barely controlled panic. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with their operations, and Marcus realized he was about to witness the moment when the Phoenix conspiracy either collapsed under its own weight or transformed into something even more dangerous. Prescott entered the conference room last, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in ways that suggested he had been awake for days. The man who normally commanded absolute authority looked like someone fighting a war on multiple fronts, and Marcus could see the strain of maintaining control over an increasingly unstable criminal enterprise. Prescott's eyes swept the room, with the paranoid intensity of someone who suspected betrayal from every direction, and Marcus felt a chill of recognition from his military experience. This was how enemy commanders looked when their operations were failing and they were preparing for desperate measures. "We have a problem," Prescott announced without preamble, his voice carrying none of its usual smooth confidence. "Someone has been systematically infiltrating our security systems and documenting our operations. The Singapore situation has been compromised, our communication networks have been penetrated, and federal investigators are asking questions that suggest they have access to classified information." Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he realized that Prescott was describing his own intelligence-gathering activities. The careful surveillance operation that Marcus had been conducting for months had finally been detected, and the conspiracy's leadership was preparing to respond with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had made them billions of dollars in stolen assets. Victoria Chen, the chief operations officer whose casual discussion of civilian casualties Marcus had recorded weeks earlier, leaned forward aggressively. "The Singapore operation was supposed to eliminate our security risk permanently. If that's been compromised, we need to implement comprehensive damage control immediately. Every potential witness becomes a liability that needs to be managed." Marcus understood the euphemism immediately. Chen wasn't talking about legal damage control or public relations management. She was discussing the systematic elimination of anyone who could provide evidence against the conspiracy. A purge that would include Sarah Kim, investigative journalists, potential whistleblowers, and anyone else who posed a threat to their operations. David Rodriguez, the chief financial officer whose laundering operations Marcus had been monitoring, pulled out a tablet and began reading from what appeared to be a target list. "We have confirmed security breaches involving at least 12 individuals who have had access to sensitive operational information. Kim is obviously the primary threat, but we also have concerns about several employees who have been asking unusual questions or accessing systems outside their normal responsibilities." Marcus realized with growing alarm that he was listening to the planning session for a mass assassination campaign designed to eliminate every potential threat to the Phoenix conspiracy. The executives were discussing murder with the same clinical detachment they used for financial planning, treating human lives as obstacles to be removed rather than people with inherent value and rights. But what terrified Marcus most was the realization that his own activities had been detected and analyzed by Apex Financial's security systems. Rodriguez's tablet contained information that could only have come from sophisticated surveillance of the building's internal networks, monitoring that would have captured evidence of Marcus's unauthorized access to executive computer systems and communication networks. "The most concerning development," Rodriguez continued, "is evidence of systematic intelligence gathering by someone with extensive access to our facilities and advanced technical capabilities. The infiltration patterns suggest military or intelligence training, and the scope of the operation indicates a level of planning and coordination that goes beyond normal corporate espionage." Marcus felt a surge of professional pride mixed with existential terror. His former colleagues had trained him well enough that even sophisticated corporate security systems recognized the quality of his intelligence work. But that recognition also meant that he was now a primary target for elimination by people who had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence against potential threats. Prescott stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, his reflection ghost-like in the reinforced glass. "The question we need to answer is whether we're dealing with a lone operator or a coordinated investigation involving multiple agencies. If it's a single individual, we can handle the situation through our normal risk management protocols. If It's a federal investigation. We need to implement the scorched earth contingency that we've been preparing for this possibility. Marcus had heard references to scorched earth contingency in previous conversations, but he had never understood what it meant until Chen began explaining the details to the assembled executives. The contingency was a comprehensive plan for destroying evidence, eliminating witnesses, and transferring assets to offshore accounts that couldn't be traced or frozen by law enforcement agencies. Scorched earth implementation would give us approximately 72 hours to complete asset transfers and personnel relocations before federal agencies could obtain warrants or freezing orders, Chen explained with the tone of someone discussing quarterly budget allocations. The operation would require coordination with our international partners and activation of extraction protocols for all senior personnel. Marcus realized that he was listening to the planning session for the complete dissolution of the Phoenix conspiracy, a controlled collapse that would allow the senior executives to escape with their stolen assets while leaving behind a trail of destroyed evidence and dead witnesses. The operation would be the corporate equivalent of a military retreat, designed to minimize losses while preserving the core leadership's ability to continue their operations from new locations. But Marcus also understood that implementing the scorched earth contingency would require time and coordination that the conspiracy might not have. His intelligence gathering had been more successful than even he had realized, and the federal investigations that Rebecca Martinez was coordinating were apparently closer to breakthrough than Prescott's security team had anticipated. The conversation was interrupted by Prescott's personal assistant, who entered the conference room with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Sir, I have Sarah Kim on line 1. She says she has information about the Singapore situation that you need to hear immediately." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the executives realized that their primary target was making contact voluntarily. Prescott's expression shifted from paranoid concern to predatory calculation as he considered the implications of Kim's call. Marcus could practically see the mental gears turning as Prescott weighed the possibilities. Was Kim calling to negotiate? Was she trying to gather information about their plans? Was this a trap being orchestrated by federal investigators? "Put her through on speaker," Prescott ordered, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "But activate recording protocols and trace the call location. I want to know exactly where she is and who might be listening." Kim's voice filled the conference room through the high-quality audio system, and Marcus could hear the tension and fear that she was trying to conceal behind a facade of professional calm. "Jonathan, I think we need to discuss the current situation. I have information that suggests both of our organizations are facing threats that go beyond our previous disagreements." Prescott's response was carefully modulated, designed to extract information while revealing as little as possible about his own knowledge or plans. "Sarah, I'm glad you called. We've been concerned about your safety, especially given some of the unusual activity we've been detecting around our operations." "What kind of threats are you referring to?" Marcus realized that he was witnessing a verbal chess match between two highly intelligent adversaries who understood that every word could have life or death consequences. Kim was trying to gather information about the conspiracy's response plans while avoiding revealing the extent of her own knowledge or preparation. Prescott was attempting to determine how much Kim knew and whether she represented an immediate threat that needed to be eliminated. "I have reason to believe that our communication networks have been compromised by a third party with sophisticated capabilities," Kim said carefully. "Someone has been monitoring our activities and documenting our operations with a level of detail that suggests professional intelligence gathering. I think we're both being investigated by federal agencies that have resources we haven't adequately considered." The executives in the conference room exchanged glances that confirmed Marcus's suspicion that Kim's assessment was accurate. The Phoenix conspiracy was facing exactly the kind of coordinated law enforcement investigation that they had always feared, and their usual methods of corruption and intimidation were proving inadequate against investigators who couldn't be bought or threatened. Prescott was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see him weighing his options with the calculating precision that had made him one of the most successful criminals in corporate history. Finally, Prescott spoke with a tone that sounded almost reasonable, but which Marcus recognized as the verbal equivalent of a loaded weapon. "Sarah, I think you're right about the scope of the threats we're facing. Perhaps it would be beneficial for us to meet and discuss our mutual concerns in person. I'm sure we can find a solution that protects both of our interests while addressing the security challenges that we're apparently sharing." Marcus felt his blood run cold as he recognized what Prescott was really proposing. The invitation to meet in person was a trap designed to get Kim within reach of the conspiracy's assassination capabilities. Prescott was using the language of negotiation and cooperation to lure Kim into a situation where she could be eliminated permanently, removing the primary threat to the Phoenix operations while sending a message to other potential witnesses. Kim's response suggested that she understood the danger she was facing, but was confident in her ability to protect herself. "I think a face-to-face meeting would be productive, Jonathan. But given the security concerns we've both identified, I think we should meet in a neutral location with appropriate safety protocols. I'll send you coordinates for a location that should address both of our security needs." After Kim ended the call, the conference room erupted in urgent planning discussions as the executives realized that they had an opportunity to eliminate their primary threat while gathering intelligence about the broader investigation that was apparently targeting their operations. Marcus listened with growing horror as they discussed surveillance teams, extraction protocols, and permanent resolution strategies with the casual efficiency of people who had planned similar operations many times before. But Marcus also realized that Kim's call had provided him with crucial intelligence about the conspiracy's immediate plans and vulnerabilities. The executives were so focused on the threat that Kim represented that they were overlooking other potential sources of danger, including the invisible janitor who was listening to every word of their planning session. Chen was already coordinating with security teams and external contractors, arranging surveillance assets and response capabilities that would allow them to monitor Kim's location and movements. Rodriguez was transferring assets to secure accounts and activating extraction protocols that would allow senior executives to disappear within hours if the meeting with Kim went badly. Most importantly for Marcus's planning purposes, Prescott was revealing the locations and capabilities of safe houses, communication networks, and financial resources that the conspiracy used for emergency operations. Information that Marcus could use to anticipate their responses and coordinate countermeasures with his own network of allies. Marcus realized that the meeting with Kim represented both the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity that either side had faced since the conspiracy began. If Prescott succeeded in eliminating Kim and gathering intelligence about the federal investigation, the Phoenix operations could continue indefinitely with enhanced security measures that would make future exposure nearly impossible. But if Marcus could turn the meeting into a trap for the conspiracy's leadership, he could potentially capture evidence and testimony that would destroy the entire criminal enterprise while protecting Kim and other potential witnesses. The success or failure of this single operation would determine whether millions of people continued to suffer from the Phoenix conspiracy's crimes or whether justice would finally prevail against one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in history. Marcus looked around the conference room at the executives who were planning multiple murders with the same enthusiasm they usually reserved for quarterly profit projections. These people had spent years treating him like invisible furniture, never imagining that their casual discussions of crimes against humanity were being recorded and analyzed by someone with the skills and determination to stop them. The time for invisibility was ending. Marcus Rivera was about to transform from observer to active combatant in a war that would determine whether corporate criminals could operate with impunity, or whether even the most powerful conspiracies could be brought down by someone who refused to remain silent in the face of evil. Marcus spent the next 18 hours in a state of controlled panic that he hadn't experienced since his final deployment in Afghanistan. The meeting between Kim and Prescott was scheduled for Thursday evening at a warehouse complex in the industrial district, a location that Kim had chosen because she believed it offered multiple escape routes and limited surveillance opportunities. What Kim didn't know was that Marcus had been monitoring Prescott's security preparations, and the warehouse complex was being transformed into an elaborate killing ground designed to eliminate Kim while maintaining plausible deniability. The weight of knowing that a murder was being planned while being powerless to prevent it through normal channels was crushing Marcus's carefully maintained emotional defenses. He had spent 8 years perfecting the art of detached observation, training himself to witness corruption and cruelty without allowing it to affect his psychological stability. But listening to Prescott's team discuss Kim's assassination with the same casual efficiency they used for quarterly planning meetings was testing his ability to remain functional under extreme stress. Marcus had faced similar moral choices during his military service, situations where acting to save lives would compromise larger strategic objectives or expose valuable intelligence assets to enemy retaliation. The difference was that in combat zones, he had been part of a military hierarchy that made these decisions collectively and provided psychological support for soldiers dealing with impossible moral calculations. Now he was operating alone, without backup or guidance, facing choices that could save or destroy lives based entirely on his own judgment and capabilities. The isolation was becoming unbearable. Marcus had spent months gathering evidence and building networks, but the actual decision-making responsibility rested entirely on his shoulders. Elena Vasquez could provide technical support and intelligence coordination, but she couldn't make tactical decisions about when and how to expose the conspiracy. David Chen could publish evidence and coordinate media coverage, but he couldn't determine the optimal timing for maximum impact and witness protection. Rebecca Martinez could lead federal investigations and provide law enforcement response, but she couldn't authorize the kind of preemptive action that might be necessary to prevent Kim's murder. Marcus realized that his military training had prepared him for exactly this kind of leadership challenge, but he had spent years avoiding situations that required him to take command responsibility. The hypervigilance and decision-making intensity that made him an effective intelligence operative also triggered the psychological responses that made civilian life feel unbearable. He was facing a choice between protecting his own mental health and preventing crimes that would affect millions of people. The decision crystallized for Marcus when he received an encrypted message from Elena indicating that federal agencies were aware of the planned meeting but couldn't intervene without compromising ongoing investigations. Phoenix leadership expects law enforcement response, Elena's message read. Surveillance detected but intervention would reveal investigation scope. Target advised of risks but insists on maintaining operational timeline, requesting guidance on asset protection protocols. Marcus understood the operational calculus immediately. Federal investigators had invested months building cases against the Phoenix conspiracy. and premature intervention would allow senior executives to activate escape protocols that would put them beyond the reach of law enforcement permanently. Kim's assassination would be a tragedy, but it would also provide federal agencies with murder charges that could be used to pressure other conspirators into cooperation. The cold, strategic logic was impeccable from a law enforcement perspective, but it was morally unacceptable to Marcus. Kim wasn't just a valuable witness or intelligence asset. She was a person who had risked everything to expose crimes against humanity. Allowing her to be murdered for tactical advantage was the kind of calculated cruelty that Marcus had joined. The military to fight against, not to facilitate. Marcus began planning what he privately called Operation Guardian Angel, a direct intervention designed to protect Kim while creating opportunities to expose the conspiracy without compromising federal investigations. The operation would require him to abandon his invisible status permanently and accept responsibility for consequences that could include his own death. But Marcus had reached the point where inaction felt more dangerous than any risk he might face by intervening. The first component of Operation Guardian Angel was intelligence gathering about Prescott's assassination plans. Marcus used his janitor access to install surveillance equipment in Prescott's private office and conference rooms, monitoring communications and planning sessions that revealed the conspiracy's operational timeline and resource allocation. The information he gathered was both operationally valuable and psychologically devastating, as he listened to detailed discussions of torture, murder, and evidence destruction planned with corporate efficiency. Marcus discovered that Prescott had contracted with a private military company that specialized in corporate security solutions for multinational corporations operating in unstable regions. The contractors weren't traditional assassins. They were former special operations soldiers who had transitioned to corporate work that often involved the same skill sets they had developed during military service. Marcus recognized several names from the contractor roster, people he had worked with during joint operations in the Middle East. The realization that he would potentially be facing former military colleagues in combat was profoundly disturbing. For Marcus, these weren't enemy soldiers or criminal mercenaries. They were veterans who had served their country honorably, but had been drawn into corporate work that gradually corrupted their moral compass. Marcus understood how easy it would be to rationalize working for someone like Prescott, especially when financial pressures and limited civilian opportunities made corporate security work seem like a natural extension of military service. But Marcus also understood that his personal relationships with some of Prescott's contractors could be an operational advantage. Veterans who had served together developed communication patterns and tactical understanding that could be exploited by someone who knew how to recognize and manipulate those connections. Marcus began planning intervention strategies that would force the contractors to question their orders and potentially switch sides when they understood the true nature of their mission. The second component of Operation Guardian Angel was coordination with Kim's security preparations. Through Elena's anti-corruption networks, Marcus was able to establish direct communication with Kim and provide her with intelligence about Prescott's plans that she couldn't have obtained through her own resources. The information Marcus provided allowed Kim to revise her security arrangements and coordinate with federal agencies in ways that improved her survival chances while maintaining the operational requirements of ongoing investigations. Kim's response to Marcus's intelligence briefings revealed that she had been preparing for this confrontation far longer than anyone had realized. As Apex Financial's former chief technology officer, she had spent months documenting not just the Phoenix conspiracy, but also Prescott's personal security arrangements, communication networks, and emergency protocols. Kim had been planning to expose the conspiracy regardless of personal risk, and Marcus's intelligence support was helping her optimize strategies she had already been developing independently. "I know this is probably a suicide mission," Kim wrote in one of her encrypted messages to Marcus, "but I've seen what these operations do to people who can't defend themselves, and I can't live with being complicit in crimes against humanity. If I die exposing them, at least other people might have a chance to stop what's happening." Marcus recognized the moral clarity in Kim's message, the same sense of purpose that had driven him to volunteer for dangerous assignments during his military service. Kim wasn't acting out of revenge or personal ambition. She was accepting mortal risk because she understood that some principles were worth dying for. Marcus realized that his role wasn't to talk Kim out of her mission, but to ensure that her sacrifice would achieve maximum impact against the conspiracy while minimizing the likelihood that she would actually have to die. The third component of Operation Guardian Angel was preparing contingency responses for different scenarios that might develop during the meeting. Marcus couldn't predict exactly how events would unfold, but his military training had taught him to anticipate multiple possibilities and prepare flexible responses that could be adapted in real time based on changing circumstances. If Kim succeeded in gathering evidence during the meeting and escaped safely, Marcus would coordinate with federal agencies to maximize the impact of her testimony while protecting her from retaliation. If Kim was captured or killed, Marcus would implement immediate exposure protocols that would reveal the Phoenix conspiracy through multiple channels simultaneously, ensuring that her death would not allow the criminals to escape justice. But Marcus was also preparing for scenarios that went beyond simple success or failure. If the meeting revealed information about additional conspirators or criminal operations, Marcus needed to be ready to expand his intelligence gathering and coordinate with international law enforcement agencies. If Prescott's response indicated that the conspiracy was more extensive or dangerous than previously understood, Marcus needed to be prepared for escalation that could affect global financial stability. The psychological pressure of preparing for so many different possibilities while maintaining his normal janitorial routine was pushing Marcus toward the kind of hypervigilance that had made civilian life difficult after his military service. He was sleeping 3 hours per night, analyzing threat scenarios during every spare moment and experiencing the heightened sensory awareness that his mind associated with combat environments. But Marcus also realized that the psychological stress he was experiencing was actually improving his operational effectiveness. The combination of military training and extreme motivation was pushing his analytical and planning capabilities to levels he hadn't achieved since his deployment days. He was thinking with the clarity and intensity that came from accepting that failure would result in catastrophic consequences for people he was responsible for protecting. On Wednesday evening, less than 24 hours before the scheduled meeting, Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its emotional impact. He recorded a video message explaining his actions and motivations, a digital testimony that would be automatically transmitted to Eleanor, Chen, and Martinez if he failed to check in within 48 hours of the meeting. Recording the message forced Marcus to articulate feelings and motivations that he had been avoiding since beginning his investigation of the Phoenix conspiracy. He had been telling himself that he was acting out of professional obligation and moral duty, but creating a permanent record of his reasoning revealed emotional depths that he hadn't acknowledged. "I joined the army because I believed that evil prospers when good people do nothing," Marcus said to the camera. "I became an intelligence operative because I understood that the most dangerous enemies are often invisible until someone takes the risk to expose them. I became a janitor because I thought I was done fighting other people's wars and cleaning up other people's messes. Marcus paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression that carried 8 years of accumulated anger and determination. But some wars choose their soldiers, and some messes require cleaning by people who understand how to handle toxic materials safely. The Phoenix conspiracy represents the same kind of evil that I spent 12 years fighting overseas, except now it's wearing expensive suits and hiding behind corporate respectability. The video message concluded with tactical information about Marcus's investigation methods and evidence locations, ensuring that his work could continue even if he didn't survive the next 48 hours. But the emotional core of the message was Marcus's acknowledgement that he had found a mission worthy of the skills and sacrifices that had defined his military service. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus Rivera felt like he was fighting for something that mattered more than his own safety or comfort. The shy janitor, who had perfected invisibility, was preparing to become visible in the most dangerous way possible, and he was discovering that the courage he thought he had lost was actually just waiting for a battle worthy of his commitment. A breakthrough that would change everything came at 2:17 a.m. on Thursday morning, 18 hours before Kim's scheduled meeting with Prescott. Marcus was conducting his final intelligence sweep of the executive floors when he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden in a file folder marked Quarterly Maintenance Schedules, he found detailed floor plans of the warehouse, complex where the meeting was supposed to take place, annotated with tactical markings that he recognized from his military training. The plans revealed that Prescott's team had been surveilling the warehouse location for weeks, mapping sight lines, escape routes, and potential ambush positions with the thoroughness of a military operation. More disturbing were the handwritten notes in the margins, discussing overlapping fields of fire, secondary elimination protocols, and evidence disposal logistics. This wasn't just an assassination plan, it was a comprehensive operation, designed to eliminate Kim and anyone who might accompany her while leaving no forensic evidence. Marcus photographed every page of the tactical plans using techniques that would leave no trace of his presence. But the information he gathered forced him to completely revise his understanding of the threat Kim was facing. Prescott wasn't planning a simple murder disguised as a business meeting gone wrong. He was orchestrating a military-style ambush using professional contractors with access to advanced weapons and surveillance equipment. The tactical annotations revealed that Prescott's team had identified 17 different positions within the warehouse complex where Kim might position herself or attempt to escape. Each position had been analyzed for vulnerability to sniper fire, explosive devices, or direct assault by ground teams. The level of planning suggested that Kim would be walking into a killing zone designed by people who understood exactly how. Intelligent, resourceful targets might attempt to protect themselves, but the most chilling discovery was a section of the plans labeled contingency protocols that detailed responses for various scenarios that might develop during the operation. If Kim arrived alone, she would be captured, interrogated about her knowledge and contacts, and then eliminated. If she brought security personnel, the entire group would be killed, and the deaths staged to look like a gang-related shooting. If law enforcement appeared during the operation, the contractors would implement scorched earth protocols that included destroying the warehouse and eliminating all witnesses. Marcus realized that Kim's confidence in her ability to survive the meeting was based on assumptions that were catastrophically wrong. She was planning to meet with a businessman who might be dangerous, but she was actually walking into a trap set by military professionals who had spent years perfecting the art of killing people efficiently and covering their tracks completely. Discovery of the tactical plans triggered a cascade of realizations that forced Marcus to confront the true scope of his responsibility. Kim wasn't just facing assassination. She was walking into an operation designed by people whose skills matched or exceeded his own military training. Protecting her would require more than intelligence support or coordination with federal agencies. It would require direct intervention, using the same combat skills that Marcus had spent 8 years trying to forget. Marcus understood that his psychological resistance to violent confrontation wasn't weakness or cowardice. It was his mind's attempt to protect him from the kind of moral injury that came from taking human life, even in legitimate defense of innocent people. His military service had required him to kill enemy combatants in circumstances that were legally and morally justified, but the psychological cost of those actions had contributed to the adjustment difficulties that made civilian life challenging. Now, Marcus was facing the possibility that protecting Kim might require him to kill again, potentially targeting former military colleagues who were being used by criminals, but who might not fully understand the nature of their mission. The moral complexity of the situation was exactly the kind of impossible choice that had driven Marcus to seek invisibility and isolation after his military service. But Marcus also understood that his reluctance to engage in violence was exactly why he was the right person to make these decisions. Someone who took killing lightly would be more likely to use excessive force or target innocent people. Someone who understood the true cost of violence would be more likely to find solutions that minimized harm while achieving necessary objectives. Marcus began planning what he privately called Operation Redemption, a comprehensive intervention designed to neutralize the threat to Kim while gathering evidence that would expose the Phoenix conspiracy and protect other potential victims. The operation would require him to use every skill he had developed during his military service, but it would also require him to transcend the limitations that had defined his post-service life. The first component of Operation Redemption was intelligence preparation that would allow Marcus to anticipate and counter Prescott's tactical plans. Marcus spent the next 6 hours analyzing the warehouse complex using satellite imagery, building inspection records, and utility company databases that revealed the location of power systems, communication networks, and structural vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the operation. Marcus discovered that the warehouse complex was larger and more complicated than Prescott's tactical plans had indicated. The facility included multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels that had been constructed during World War II for munitions storage. The tunnel system wasn't shown on any modern building plans, but Marcus found references to it in historical archives that suggested it could provide concealment and movement options that Prescott's team hadn't anticipated. More importantly, Marcus identified several locations within the complex where he could position surveillance equipment and defensive positions without being detected by conventional security sweeps. His military training had taught him to think like both attacker and defender simultaneously, understanding how to exploit environmental advantages while denying those same advantages to enemy forces. The second component of Operation Redemption was coordination with external assets that could provide support without compromising federal investigations or exposing Marcus's identity to Prescott's security teams. Through Elena's networks, Marcus arranged for independent contractors to be positioned around the warehouse complex, professionals who could provide overwatch, communication relay, and emergency extraction if the operation went badly. Marcus was careful to ensure that his external support team understood they were protecting a federal witness from corporate assassination, not participating in criminal activity that could jeopardize their own legal status. The contractors Elena provided were former military personnel who had maintained their security clearances and their commitment to protecting innocent people from criminal violence. But Marcus also understood that his external support team couldn't be relied upon for direct combat assistance. Their role was to provide intelligence, communication, and extraction capabilities that would allow Marcus to operate independently while maintaining connection to resources that could assist Kim's escape if his primary plans failed. The third component of Operation Redemption was direct communication with Kim that would allow her to coordinate her actions with Marcus's intervention plans without revealing his identity or compromising his operational security. Through Elena's encrypted networks, Marcus provided Kim with tactical intelligence about the warehouse complex and suggested modifications to her security arrangements that would improve her survival chances. Kim's response to Marcus's tactical briefings revealed that she had underestimated the sophistication of the threat she was facing, but she was remarkably adaptable in revising her plans based on new information. As a former technology executive, she understood operational planning and risk assessment, even if she lacked the military training necessary to recognize sophisticated ambush tactics. "I appreciate the intelligence support," Kim wrote in one of her encrypted messages, "but I need to understand whether you're planning to intervene directly or if you're just providing information. If you're going to be on site, we need to coordinate our actions to avoid interfering with each other's objectives." Marcus realized that Kim's question forced him to confront the central decision that would define Operation Redemption. He could continue providing intelligence support while allowing Kim to face the assassination attempt alone, or he could commit to direct intervention that would require him to abandon his invisible status permanently and accept responsibility for whatever violence might be necessary to protect her. The decision was complicated by Marcus's understanding that direct intervention would almost certainly result in casualties among Prescott's contractor team, people who might be former military colleagues acting on incomplete information about their mission's true nature. Marcus would be forced to choose between protecting Kim and avoiding harm to people who had served their country honorably but had been manipulated into participating in criminal activities. Marcus spent hours analyzing different intervention scenarios, looking for options that would protect Kim while minimizing casualties among Prescott's team. The tactical situation was challenging because the warehouse complex provided numerous advantages to defenders who arrived first and prepared ambush positions. But it also offered opportunities for someone with sufficient skill and preparation to turn those same advantages against attackers. The solution Marcus developed was based on his experience with asymmetric warfare operations, where small, highly skilled teams had successfully disrupted larger, better-equipped enemy forces. Instead of trying to match Prescott's team in firepower or numbers, Marcus would use superior intelligence, environmental knowledge, and tactical surprise to neutralize their advantages, while creating opportunities for Kim to escape safely. Marcus's plan involved arriving at the warehouse complex 6 hours before the scheduled meeting, using the underground tunnel system to position surveillance equipment and defensive measures throughout the facility. When Prescott's team arrived to establish their ambush positions, they would unknowingly be entering an environment that Marcus had already mapped, monitored, and prepared for defensive operations. The key to the plan's success was Marcus's ability to remain undetected while Prescott's team established their positions, then coordinate Kim's arrival in ways that would force the contractors to reveal themselves while denying them clear shots at their target. Marcus would use his knowledge of the facility's layout and his surveillance network to guide Kim through safe routes while simultaneously gathering evidence of the assassination attempt. But Marcus also understood that even the best tactical plans rarely survived contact with enemy forces, especially when those forces included professional soldiers with combat experience comparable to his own. He needed to be prepared for scenarios where direct combat became unavoidable, situations where protecting Kim might require him to kill people who had once served alongside him in defense of their country. The psychological weight of that possibility was crushing, but Marcus realized that his moral obligation to protect innocent people outweighed his personal desire to avoid violence. Kim was risking her life to expose crimes that were affecting millions of people worldwide. Marcus couldn't allow his own psychological limitations to prevent him from providing the protection she needed to survive and continue her mission. On Thursday afternoon, 8 hours before the scheduled meeting, Marcus recorded a final message for Elena, Chen, and Martinez, explaining his operational plans and providing detailed intelligence about the Phoenix conspiracy that could be used to continue investigations regardless of what happened at the warehouse complex. The message was both a tactical briefing and a personal testament, documenting Marcus's journey from invisible janitor to active combatant in the war against corporate criminals. "I spent 8 years learning to be invisible because I thought I was done fighting," Marcus said to the camera. "But some fights are too important to avoid, and some people are too valuable to lose. Tonight, I'm going to prove that the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming, even when he's been standing right in front of you all along." Marcus sealed the message in Elena's encrypted communication system and began his final preparations for Operation Redemption. The shy janitor, who had perfected the art of being ignored, was about to become the most visible and dangerous man in Jonathan Prescott's criminal empire. And he was finally ready to show the world what happened when invisible people decided to fight back. The warehouse complex at 9 p.m. was a maze of shadows and industrial decay that reminded Marcus of the urban combat environments he had navigated during his military service. He had arrived 6 hours early, using the cover of darkness and his knowledge of the facility's layout to establish surveillance positions and defensive preparations throughout the complex. The underground tunnel system had proven even more extensive than historical records indicated, providing him with concealed movement routes and observation points that would be invisible to conventional security sweeps. Marcus positioned himself in a control room overlooking the main warehouse floor, a vantage point that provided visual coverage of the primary meeting area while offering multiple escape routes through the tunnel system. His surveillance equipment was recording everything, creating a comprehensive record of the assassination attempt that would provide federal investigators with evidence of Prescott's criminal activities, regardless of how the evening's events unfolded. At 9:30 p.m., Prescott's advance team arrived in 2 unmarked vehicles, moving with the professional efficiency that Marcus recognized from joint operations with Special Forces units. The team leader was someone Marcus knew from his deployment in Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, a decorated combat veteran who had transitioned to corporate security work after struggling with civilian employment opportunities. Watching Morrison coordinate the establishment of ambush positions was psychologically devastating for Marcus. This was someone who had saved American lives, protected innocent civilians, and upheld the highest standards of military professionalism during their shared service. Now Morrison was preparing to murder a whistleblower who was trying to expose crimes against humanity, apparently believing that he was conducting legitimate corporate security operations. Marcus activated his communication system and sent Morrison a coded message using military protocols they had both memorized during their deployment. "Phoenix 6, this is Guardian Angel. You are being used to conduct unlawful assassination of federal witness." Recommend immediate extraction and contact with military legal counsel. Your current mission violates laws of war and will result in prosecution for murder. Acknowledge if you copy. Morrison's response came through the same encrypted military channel, and Marcus could hear the confusion and concern in his former colleague's voice. Guardian Angel, this is Phoenix 6. Unable to confirm identity or authority. Current mission authorized through proper corporate channels with legal review. Requesting verification of your credentials and information sources. Marcus realized that Morrison and his team had been given false information about their mission, probably told that they were protecting corporate executives from terrorist threats or conducting legitimate security operations against industrial espionage. Prescott had manipulated honorable veterans into participating in crimes by exploiting their trust in authority and their unfamiliarity with corporate law enforcement procedures. Phoenix 6. Your target is Sarah Kim, former CTO of Apex Financial, cooperating with federal investigators regarding financial crimes affecting global markets, Marcus transmitted. She is protected federal witness seeking to expose Operation Blackwater and Phoenix protocols. Your mission parameters constitute assassination of civilian under federal protection. Verify mission authorization through military legal channels. Immediately. The silence that followed Marcus's transmission lasted nearly 5 minutes, and he could see Morrison's team conducting urgent radio communications using different frequencies that suggested they were contacting their corporate handlers for mission clarification. Marcus realized that his intervention had introduced doubt into a carefully planned operation, forcing Morrison's team to question orders they had previously accepted without hesitation. But Marcus also understood that Prescott's handlers would provide Morrison with explanations and assurances designed to overcome his doubts and maintain his commitment to the mission. Corporate security companies employed psychological specialists who understood how to manipulate military personnel into accepting questionable assignments by appealing to their sense of duty and their trust in chain-of-command structures. 10:15 p.m. Kim arrived at the warehouse complex in a vehicle that Marcus recognized as an FBI surveillance asset, confirming that federal agencies were monitoring the situation while maintaining operational distance. Kim moved with careful precision that suggested she had received tactical training since their last communication, probably from federal marshals or other law enforcement personnel responsible for witness protection. Marcus watched Kim enter the main warehouse through the primary entrance, following the route they had discussed through encrypted communications. She was wearing body armor beneath her business attire and carrying communication equipment that would allow her to maintain contact with federal backup teams positioned outside the complex. But Marcus could see that Kim's preparations, while professional, were inadequate for the sophisticated threat she was actually facing. Morrison's team had established overlapping fields of fire that would allow them to eliminate Kim from multiple angles simultaneously, using suppressed weapons that would minimize noise and prevent her federal backup from identifying the source of gunfire immediately. The assassination would appear to be a sudden, coordinated attack by unknown assailants, giving Morrison's team time to escape before law enforcement could respond effectively. Kim reached the center of the warehouse floor and activated a portable lighting system that illuminated the meeting area while creating shadows that concealed Morrison's team positions. She appeared calm and professional, but Marcus could see subtle signs of tension that indicated she understood the magnitude of the risk she was facing. "Jonathan, I know you're here," Kim called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I also know that you've brought security personnel, and I know that you're planning to kill me, but I have information that you need to hear before you make decisions that will destroy everything you've worked to build." Prescott emerged from a concealed position behind shipping containers, flanked by 2 additional security personnel, who Marcus didn't recognize. Prescott looked older and more haggard than Marcus had ever seen him, showing the strain of coordinating a global criminal conspiracy while facing increasing pressure from federal investigations and internal betrayals. "Sarah, I'm disappointed that you would make such dramatic accusations," Prescott said, his voice carrying its usual smooth authority despite the circumstances. "I came here hoping we could resolve our disagreements professionally. The security personnel are here because I've received credible threats against my life, not because I have any intention of harming you." Marcus could see Kim's body language shift as she recognized the practiced deception in Prescott's words. She had worked with him long enough to understand his manipulation techniques, and she wasn't going to be drawn into a false negotiation designed to position her for easier elimination. "The Phoenix Protocols document systematic crimes against humanity affecting millions of people worldwide," Kim said, her voice gaining strength and clarity. "I have copies of those documents, along with audio recordings of planning sessions, where you and your associates discussed murder, market manipulation, and money laundering operations that violate international law." Prescott's expression darkened as he realized that Kim had more comprehensive evidence than his intelligence. Teams had indicated. Marcus could see him processing the implications of Kim's revelations, calculating whether immediate assassination would be sufficient to contain the threat she represented, or whether broader damage control measures would be necessary. "You're making very serious accusations, Sarah," Prescott replied carefully. "Accusations that could be considered defamatory if they were repeated in public without proper evidence. Perhaps we should discuss the legal implications of your allegations before proceeding further." Marcus recognized the verbal maneuvering as a stalling tactic designed to keep Kim talking, while Morrison's team finalized their firing positions. Through his surveillance network, Marcus could see the contractors adjusting their weapons and coordinating their targeting assignments through tactical hand signals. The moment of truth was approaching rapidly, and Marcus realized that his intervention would need to be immediate and decisive if Kim was going to survive the next 60 seconds. Morrison's team was prepared to eliminate Kim on Prescott's signal, and Marcus was the only person in position to prevent the assassination. Marcus activated the warehouse's fire suppression system, triggering emergency lighting and alarm systems that filled the complex with flashing lights, loud sirens, and chemical fog designed to suppress industrial fires. The sudden chaos disrupted Morrison's team's firing solutions while providing Kim with concealment that would allow her to move toward predetermined escape routes. Simultaneously, Marcus activated speakers throughout the warehouse complex, broadcasting the audio recordings from the Phoenix Protocols that documented Prescott's planning of crimes against humanity. The recordings filled the air with Prescott's own voice, discussing murder, market manipulation, and the calculated destruction of civilian populations for financial gain. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos on the military communication channel, filled with shock and anger, as he recognized Prescott's voice, describing operations that violated every principle Morrison had sworn to uphold during his military service. Guardian Angel, confirm authenticity of broadcast materials. Are those recordings legitimate documentation of criminal planning? Phoenix 6, recordings are authentic federal evidence documenting systematic violations of international law, including murder, money laundering, and crimes against humanity. Marcus responded. Your current mission involves assassination of federal witness attempting to expose these crimes. Recommend immediate mission abort and cooperation with federal authorities. Marcus could see Morrison's team lowering their weapons as they listened to the recordings that revealed the true nature of their mission. These were honorable veterans who had been deceived into participating in criminal activities, and they were responding with appropriate outrage when confronted with evidence of their manipulation. But Prescott's personal security team was moving to eliminate Kim despite the chaos, apparently following orders that prioritized mission completion over operational security. Marcus realized that direct intervention was now unavoidable if Kim was going to survive the next few minutes. Marcus emerged from his concealed position and moved through the warehouse complex, using routes that the fog and emergency lighting had rendered invisible to conventional surveillance. His military training took over completely, suppressing 8 years of civilian hesitation and psychological resistance as he approached the combat situation with lethal efficiency. Prescott's first security contractor went down silently, subdued by techniques that Marcus had perfected during close-quarters combat operations in urban environments. The second contractor managed to transmit a warning before Marcus neutralized him, but the warning was lost in the chaos of alarms, fog, and broadcast recordings that continued to document Prescott's crimes. Kim was moving toward her designated escape route when Prescott himself appeared through the fog, carrying a pistol and moving with the desperate determination of someone whose entire criminal empire was collapsing around him. Marcus could see that Prescott intended to kill Kim personally rather than rely on contractors who had been compromised by evidence of their mission's true nature. "You destroyed everything," Prescott shouted at Kim, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. 30 years of building the most sophisticated financial operation in history, and you destroyed it because you couldn't understand the bigger picture. Do you have any idea how many people depend on our operations for their livelihoods? Marcus positioned himself between Prescott and Kim, finally abandoning the invisibility that had protected him for 8 years. "Jonathan Prescott, you are under citizen's arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, crimes against humanity, and violations of federal racketeering statutes. Drop your weapon and surrender to federal authorities immediately." Prescott's reaction to seeing Marcus was a mixture of shock, rage, and recognition that his most dangerous enemy had been hiding in plain sight for months. "You're the janitor," Prescott said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're the one who's been gathering intelligence and coordinating with federal agencies. How long have you been planning this?" 8 years, Marcus replied, keeping his weapon. "Trained on Prescott while positioning himself to shield Kim from potential gunfire. Ever since I started cleaning up the messes that people like you leave behind. The difference is that tonight you're finally going to face consequences for the damage you've caused." The sound of federal vehicles surrounding the warehouse complex echoed through the fog and emergency lighting as Rebecca Martinez's Financial Crimes Unit implemented the coordinated arrest operation that Marcus had been building toward for months. Prescott's expression shifted from desperate rage to the cold calculation of someone who understood that his criminal empire was finally collapsing, but who wasn't prepared to surrender without extracting whatever revenge was still possible. "You all think this ends anything?" Prescott said, his weapon still trained on Kim, despite the approaching federal agents. "The Phoenix protocols involve dozens of financial institutions across 6 continents. Arresting me just creates a power vacuum that will be filled by people who are smarter and more ruthless than I ever was." Marcus kept his own weapon steady, while monitoring Prescott's body language for signs of immediate threat escalation. His military training had taught him to recognize the difference between someone who was posturing for psychological advantage and someone who was genuinely preparing to commit violence, regardless of consequences. Prescott's stance and grip suggested he was moving toward the latter category. "Maybe," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the calm authority that came from accepting whatever outcome the situation demanded. "But those people will know that invisible janitors and federal investigators are watching them, They'll know that former military personnel won't participate in assassination contracts once they understand what they're really being asked to do. And they'll know that whistleblowers have protection from people who understand the true cost of staying silent. Through the chaos of the warehouse complex, Marcus could see Morrison's team coordinating with federal agents who were establishing perimeters around the facility. The recordings that continued broadcasting through the warehouse speakers were providing real-time evidence of the assassination attempt, creating documentation that would make prosecution of conspiracy charges inevitable, even if some participants escaped immediate capture. Kim had reached a position of relative safety behind shipping containers that provided cover from potential gunfire, but Marcus could see that she was preparing to intervene if Prescott's desperation escalated to immediate violence. Her federal protection training had apparently included tactical response procedures, and she understood the importance of maintaining witness safety while gathering evidence of criminal activities. "Sarah, you still don't understand what you've destroyed," Prescott continued, his attention shifting between Marcus and Kim as he calculated the tactical situation. "The Phoenix protocols weren't just about profit. We were creating financial stability in regions where governments had failed completely. Our operations provided employment, infrastructure development, and economic opportunity for millions of people who had been abandoned by their own leaders." Marcus recognized the rationalization pattern from interrogations he had conducted during his military service. Criminals facing the collapse of their operations often attempted to reframe their activities as necessary services or humanitarian interventions, seeking psychological comfort by portraying themselves as misunderstood benefactors rather than predatory criminals. "You created economic instability that forced 2.3 million people from their homes," Kim responded, her voice carrying the authority that came from having documented the actual consequences of Prescott's operations. "You manipulated agricultural markets that contributed to food insecurity affecting 15 million people. You destroyed the savings of 8.7 million families through currency manipulation designed to benefit your asset acquisition strategies." Prescott's reaction to Kim's recitation of casualty statistics was immediate and violent. Marcus could see the psychological shift as Prescott abandoned his attempts at justification and moved toward the desperate violence of someone who had been confronted with undeniable evidence of his crime's human cost. Marcus's response was instantaneous and precise, drawing on muscle memory that had been developed through thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. Prescott's weapon was neutralized before he could fire, and he was on the ground with Marcus's knee on his back and federal agents surrounding them with weapons drawn before the echo of their struggle had faded from the warehouse walls. "Jonathan. Prescott, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, and crimes against humanity," Agent Martinez announced as she approached with handcuffs and a tactical team that had been monitoring the situation from outside the complex. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly recommend that you exercise that right until you've consulted with legal counsel." As federal agents secured Prescott and began processing the crime scene, Marcus felt the psychological transition that he had been dreading for 8 years. The hypervigilance and tactical thinking that had made him effective during the confrontation were fading, replaced by the emotional crash that always followed intense combat situations. His hands were shaking despite his efforts to maintain composure, and he could feel the onset of the psychological symptoms that had made civilian life so difficult after his military service. But this time, the emotional aftermath felt different. Instead of the guilt and moral confusion that had followed his military combat experiences, Marcus felt a clarity and sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since returning from deployment. He had used violence to protect innocent people, rather than to achieve strategic objectives that he didn't fully understand. He had made tactical decisions based on his own moral judgment rather than following orders that might have conflicted with his personal values. Kim approached Marcus. As federal agents continued securing the warehouse complex and processing evidence that would be used in prosecutions that could take years to complete. Her expression combined gratitude, exhaustion, and the kind of respect that came from having witnessed someone risk everything to protect a principle rather than a person. "Thank you," Kim said simply, extending her hand in a gesture that carried more weight than elaborate speeches could have conveyed. "I know what you sacrificed to be here tonight, and I know what this cost you personally. The people whose lives you saved will never know your name, but their children will grow up in a world where financial criminals face consequences for their actions." Marcus shook Kim's hand, feeling the connection that came from having shared mortal risk in service of something larger than personal survival. "We both knew this was bigger than our individual safety," Marcus replied. "The Phoenix Protocols represented the kind of systematic evil that destroys civilizations if good people don't find the courage to resist it. Tonight, we proved that invisible people can become visible when the stakes are high enough." Agent Martinez joined their conversation as federal technicians began documenting the evidence that Marcus's surveillance equipment had captured throughout the evening. The recording devices had functioned perfectly, creating a comprehensive record of the assassination attempt that would provide prosecutors with evidence that couldn't be challenged or dismissed through legal technicalities. "Marcus, I need to understand the scope of your intelligence-gathering operation," Martinez said, her tone carrying professional respect rather than suspicion. "The evidence you've provided represents the most comprehensive documentation of financial crimes that our unit has ever encountered. We need to ensure that your methods were consistent with federal evidence standards and that we can use this information in court proceedings." Marcus had been preparing for this conversation for months, understanding that his transition from invisible observer to active combatant would require him to explain his methods to law enforcement officials, who might view his activities as vigilantism rather than legitimate intelligence gathering. His military background provided legal protections for some of his activities, but he had also operated outside normal civilian law enforcement protocols in ways that could complicate prosecutions. "Everything I gathered was collected through passive observation of activities that occurred in public or semi-public spaces," Marcus explained carefully. "I never conducted illegal surveillance or obtained information through methods that would violate federal evidence standards. My military training taught me to document criminal activities without compromising legal procedures that would be necessary for prosecution." Martinez nodded approvingly, recognizing that Marcus had been careful to build his case in ways that would support rather than compromise federal investigations. "The coordination you provided with international agencies and investigative journalists also helped us build corroborating evidence through independent sources. This case represents the kind of multi-jurisdictional cooperation that makes prosecuting global financial crimes possible." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself at the center of a media storm that he had never wanted, but which was unavoidable given the scope of the Phoenix conspiracy and the dramatic circumstances of its exposure. The story of the invisible janitor who had brought down $1 billion criminal enterprise captured public attention in ways that forced him to abandon the anonymity he had cultivated for 8 years. But Marcus also discovered that his visibility brought opportunities for positive impact that had been impossible during his years of hiding from civilian engagement. Veterans organizations asked him to speak about transitioning military skills to civilian service. Anti-corruption groups requested his assistance in training investigators who were targeting financial crimes in developing countries. Congressional committees sought his testimony about regulatory failures that had allowed the Phoenix conspiracy to operate for years without detection. Most importantly, Marcus found that his experience had prepared him to help other veterans who were struggling with the transition from military service to civilian life. His combination of combat experience and intelligence training, along with his understanding of how those skills could be applied to civilian problems, made him uniquely qualified to mentor veterans who felt disconnected from civilian society. 3 months after the warehouse confrontation, Marcus received a letter from Sarah Kim, who had completed her federal testimony and was beginning a new career as a consultant for international anti-corruption organizations. Her letter described the prosecution progress against Phoenix conspiracy participants and the policy changes that were being implemented to prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating with impunity. The Phoenix Protocol's prosecutions have resulted in charges against 127 individuals across 23 countries, Kim wrote. Asset recovery operations have identified more than $47 billion in stolen funds that are being returned to the communities that were targeted by these crimes. But more importantly, the investigation has revealed systematic regulatory failures that are being addressed through international cooperation agreements. Kim's letter also described the personal transformation that had resulted from their shared experience confronting the Phoenix conspiracy. I spent years believing that technical competence was sufficient for creating positive change in the world. Our experience taught me that technical skills without moral courage are meaningless when confronting systematic evil. I'm now working with organizations that combine both elements in ways that can actually protect vulnerable populations. Marcus understood exactly what Kim meant about the transformation that came from choosing moral courage over personal safety. His years of invisibility had been psychologically necessary for recovering from military trauma, but they had also prevented him from using his skills and experience to address civilian problems that required the same kind of systematic thinking and tactical planning that had made him effective during military service. A year after the warehouse confrontation, Marcus stood in the same conference room where he had first overheard Prescott's casual discussion of crimes against humanity. But instead of cleaning around executives who treated him like furniture, Marcus was briefing congressional investigators about regulatory changes that could prevent future financial conspiracies from reaching the scale and sophistication of the Phoenix Protocols. The key lesson from this investigation is that systematic evil relies on the invisibility of both its operations and the people who might be positioned to expose it, Marcus testified. Financial criminals assume that service workers, veterans, and other overlooked populations lack the skills or motivation to understand and document complex crimes. Creating systems that recognize and protect those potential witnesses is essential for preventing corporate crime. Marcus's congressional testimony was broadcast internationally, reaching audiences that included veterans who were struggling with civilian transition, service workers who had observed suspicious activities in their workplaces, and potential whistleblowers who needed to understand that protection and support were available for people who chose to expose criminal activities. The shy janitor who had perfected invisibility had become one of the most visible advocates for the principle that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they found the courage to use their unique advantages in service of justice. Marcus Rivera had finally discovered that the most powerful weapon against systematic evil wasn't advanced technology or unlimited resources. It was the willingness of invisible people to become visible when the stakes were high enough to justify the risk. The Phoenix conspiracy had been defeated not by traditional law enforcement or international agencies, but by a collaboration between overlooked individuals who understood that some battles choose their soldiers, and that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones that nobody expects to fight back. 2 years after the Phoenix Protocol scandal became international headlines, Marcus Rivera found himself standing in an unexpected place that would have seemed impossible during his years of careful invisibility. The United Nations headquarters in New York had invited him to address their global anti-corruption summit, where representatives from 193 countries were gathering to discuss systematic approaches to financial crime prevention. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that the same invisibility skills that had allowed him to gather evidence against the Phoenix conspiracy were now making him one of the most sought-after speakers on corporate accountability. But more importantly, Marcus had discovered that his unique perspective as someone who had bridged the gap between service work and intelligence operations provided insights that traditional experts often missed. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, looking out at an audience that included heads of state, federal prosecutors, and anti-corruption advocates from around the world. I want to tell you about the most powerful surveillance network that has ever existed, and why most criminal organizations have no idea they're being watched by it every single day. Marcus paused, allowing the tension to build as delegates leaned forward with curiosity about what revolutionary technology he might be describing. That surveillance network consists of janitors, security guards, delivery drivers, food service workers, and millions of other people who are so invisible to the powerful that they might as well be ghosts. These people see everything, hear everything, and remember everything. But criminal organizations never consider them a threat because they've been trained to believe that invisible people don't matter. The audience's reaction was immediate and intense as government officials and law enforcement professionals realized that Marcus was describing an intelligence resource that they had never considered systematically utilizing. The same invisibility that allowed service workers to observe criminal activities also made them ideal potential witnesses and intelligence sources if they could be protected and supported properly. Marcus continued his presentation by describing the comprehensive changes that had resulted from the Phoenix Protocol's investigation. International banking regulations had been strengthened to prevent the kind of coordinated market manipulation that had devastated developing economies. Money laundering detection systems had been enhanced to identify patterns that suggested systematic financial warfare rather than individual criminal transactions. But the most significant changes had been in witness protection and support systems that encouraged overlooked individuals to report criminal activities they observed in their workplaces. The success of Marcus's investigation had demonstrated that service workers often had better access to criminal evidence than traditional investigators if they could be trained to recognize important information and protected from retaliation when they came forward. The Phoenix conspiracy operated successfully for years because they believed their crimes were invisible to people who mattered, Marcus explained. They never imagined that a night janitor with military intelligence training would be documenting their conversations and building comprehensive case files that would eventually destroy their entire operation. Marcus's UN presentation was being broadcast live to audiences around the world, reaching veterans who had struggled with civilian transition, service workers who had observed suspicious activities, and potential whistleblowers who needed to understand that their observations could have global significance if they found the courage to speak up. The broadcast reached Maria Santos, a night cleaning supervisor at a major pharmaceutical company in Mexico City, who had been noticing unusual meetings, and document shredding activities that suggested her employers were hiding clinical trial data that showed dangerous side effects. Marcus's story gave her the courage to contact international health organizations with information that would eventually save thousands of lives. It reached James Thompson, a security guard at a technology company in London, who had observed executives discussing the sale of personal data to foreign intelligence services. Thompson had assumed that his observations were unimportant because he lacked technical training, but Marcus's example showed him how to document and report activities that would expose a major privacy violation affecting millions of users. The broadcast also reached Dr. Amara Okafor, a laboratory technician in Lagos who had discovered evidence that her supervisors were falsifying environmental impact reports for mining operations that were contaminating water supplies. Marcus's foundation provided her with protection and legal support that allowed her to expose crimes that were affecting entire communities. Following his UN address, Marcus returned to his new role as director of the Invisible Witness Foundation, an organization he had established to train and protect service workers who were positioned to observe criminal activities in corporate environments. The foundation combined Marcus's military intelligence background with Sarah Kim's technology expertise and Agent Martinez's law enforcement experience, creating a comprehensive system for identifying, documenting, and prosecuting financial crimes that traditional investigations might miss. The Foundation's success had exceeded everyone's expectations, with chapters operating in 47 countries and more than 10,000 service workers trained in basic intelligence gathering and evidence documentation techniques. The program had resulted in the exposure of dozens of criminal enterprises, the recovery of billions of dollars in stolen assets, and the protection of hundreds of witnesses who might otherwise have been silenced through intimidation or violence. Marcus had also established specialized training programs for different categories of service workers, recognizing that janitors, security guards, delivery drivers, and food service employees all had unique access to different types of criminal evidence. Each program was designed to help workers recognize suspicious activities relevant to their specific positions, while protecting them from retaliation and legal consequences. The Foundation's technology division, led by Sarah Kim, had developed secure communication systems that allowed witnesses to report criminal activities anonymously, while providing law enforcement agencies with verifiable evidence that could be used in court proceedings. The systems were designed to be accessible to people without technical training, ensuring that lack of education or language barriers wouldn't prevent important information from reaching investigators. But for Marcus personally, the most meaningful aspect of his transformation had been the opportunity to help other veterans find purpose and direction in civilian life. The Foundation's Veteran Outreach Program had become a model for how military skills could be adapted to address civilian problems that required the same kind of systematic thinking and tactical planning that made soldiers effective in combat environments. Marcus had discovered that many veterans struggled with civilian transition, not because they lacked valuable skills, but because they couldn't find civilian applications for capabilities that had been essential during military service. Intelligence gathering, tactical planning, risk assessment, and leadership under pressure were all skills that could be adapted to address corporate crime, environmental protection, and social justice issues that required the same kind of systematic approach that military operations demanded. The veteran program had placed former intelligence operatives in positions where they could monitor corporate activities for regulatory violations. Former special operations soldiers in roles where they could protect witnesses from retaliation, and former military analysts in positions where they could coordinate complex investigations across multiple jurisdictions and agencies. Marcus had also married Elena Vasquez, his former Army intelligence colleague who had provided crucial support during the Phoenix investigation. Their partnership represented the kind of collaboration between military veterans that could address civilian problems requiring both technical expertise and operational experience. Elena's cybersecurity background complemented Marcus's intelligence-gathering skills, creating a professional team that could tackle criminal enterprises operating across multiple technological and jurisdictional boundaries. Their wedding had been attended by an unusual collection of guests that reflected the diverse networks Marcus had built during his transformation from invisible janitor to international anti-corruption advocate. Sarah Kim served as Elena's maid of honor, while Agent Martinez walked Marcus down the aisle in place of family members who had been estranged since his struggles with post-military adjustment. The ceremony also included dozens of service workers from around the world who had been trained by the Foundation and had successfully exposed criminal activities in their workplaces. These were people who had learned to see themselves as valuable contributors to global justice rather than invisible functionaries whose observations didn't matter to anyone with authority or resources. On a quiet Sunday morning, exactly 3 years after he had first discovered the Phoenix protocols, Marcus found himself cleaning his own office at the Invisible Witness Foundation. The work felt familiar and meditative, reminding him of the years when anonymity had provided psychological protection while he recovered from military trauma and adjusted to civilian life. But this time, the cleaning was a choice rather than a necessity, a way of maintaining connection to the experiences that had shaped his understanding of how invisible people could achieve extraordinary things when circumstances demanded courage rather than comfort. Marcus understood that his visibility as an anti-corruption advocate was temporary, but the principles he had learned about the power of overlooked individuals would continue long after public attention moved to other stories. The cleaning also served as a reminder of how much his life had changed since the night he had discovered Prescott's tactical plans in that conference room. Marcus now led an organization with annual revenues of $40 million, employed more than 300 people across 6 continents, and had been credited with helping to recover more than $15 billion in stolen assets. But Marcus measured his success not in financial terms or public recognition, but in the number of vulnerable people who had been protected from harm because invisible witnesses had found the courage to speak up about crimes they had observed. The Foundation's annual report included stories of environmental disasters prevented, human trafficking operations disrupted, and financial fraud schemes stopped before they could devastate communities. A knock on his office door interrupted Marcus's thoughts, and he looked up to see David Chen, the investigative journalist who had helped coordinate media coverage of the Phoenix investigation. Chen was carrying a thick folder that Marcus recognized as evidence documentation, suggesting that another major story was developing. "Marcus, I need your opinion on something that feels familiar," Chen said, his expression carrying the mixture of excitement and concern that accompanied major investigative breakthroughs. "We've been tracking unusual financial patterns that suggest another systematic operation targeting developing economies, but this time the criminals appear to have learned from the Phoenix investigation." Marcus accepted the folder and began reviewing the evidence that Chen had compiled. The patterns were indeed familiar, showing the same kind of coordinated market manipulation and asset extraction that had characterized the Phoenix conspiracy, but with enhanced security measures and more sophisticated methods for avoiding detection by traditional regulatory systems. They're using artificial intelligence to coordinate operations across multiple time zones and jurisdictions, Marcus observed, recognizing tactical adaptations that suggested the criminals understood how the Phoenix investigation had succeeded. But they're still relying on human networks for implementation, which means they're still vulnerable to intelligence gathering by people they consider invisible. The new conspiracy, which Chen had labeled Operation Mirage, appeared to be even more sophisticated than the Phoenix protocols, involving cryptocurrency manipulation, deepfake technology for creating false documentation, and social media algorithms designed to spread economic disinformation that would facilitate market manipulation. The criminals had learned from Prescott's mistakes and were implementing security measures specifically designed to defeat the kind of intelligence gathering that Marcus had used to expose the Phoenix conspiracy. But Chen's investigation had also revealed a crucial weakness in the new operation. The criminals still needed human operatives to implement their plans in physical locations around the world. Despite their advanced technology, they couldn't eliminate their dependence on people who had to work in offices, meet with contacts, and handle physical documents and transactions. Chen nodded approvingly, understanding that Marcus's analysis meant the Invisible Witness Foundation's methods could be adapted to address this new threat. The question is whether we can identify the key personnel and operational centers before they complete whatever they're planning. The financial patterns suggest they're preparing for something much larger than the Phoenix protocols. Marcus studied the evidence more carefully, recognizing patterns that suggested the new conspiracy was targeting not just individual economies, but the entire global financial system. The criminals appeared to be planning a coordinated attack that would cause worldwide economic instability, allowing them to profit from chaos while millions of people lost their savings, jobs, and homes. "This isn't just about stealing money," Marcus said, his voice carrying the grim recognition that came from understanding the true scope of a systematic threat. "They're planning to crash the global economy and rebuild it under their control. The human cost would be measured in hundreds of millions of lives, destroyed by poverty, hunger, and social collapse." Marcus felt the familiar surge of purpose that came from identifying systematic evil that required immediate attention. 3 years of public speaking and foundation management had been personally fulfilling, but Marcus realized that he missed the tactical challenges of active intelligence, operations against criminal enterprises that threatened innocent people. "Let's find out who thinks they can hide from invisible people," Marcus said, closing the evidence folder with the same determination that had driven him to expose the Phoenix conspiracy. Some lessons need to be taught more than once before. Certain people understand that there's no such thing as perfect invisibility when good people decide to pay attention. As Marcus and Chen began planning their investigation of this new criminal enterprise, Marcus reflected on the journey that had transformed him from a traumatized veteran seeking anonymity to one of the world's most effective advocates for corporate accountability. The shy janitor who had perfected invisibility had discovered that true strength came not from hiding from responsibility, but from using whatever advantages you possessed to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The investigation of Operation Mirage would require everything Marcus had learned about coordinating international intelligence operations while protecting vulnerable witnesses from retaliation. But this time, he wouldn't be working alone. The Invisible Witness Foundation had created a global network of trained observers who could gather evidence simultaneously across multiple continents, making it impossible for criminals to suppress information by targeting individual witnesses. If Marcus Rivera's story has inspired you to look differently at the quiet, overlooked people in your own life, hit that like button right now. If you believe that ordinary individuals can achieve extraordinary things when they find the courage to act on their principles, subscribe to this channel for more stories about invisible heroes who changed the world when circumstances demanded everything they had to give. Remember, the most revolutionary thing you can do is recognize that your unique position, whatever it might be, gives you opportunities to observe, understand, and potentially expose problems that more visible people might miss. The next time you see someone who seems invisible, ask yourself what they might know that could change everything, and whether they might be the most dangerous person in the room if they ever decided to stop being silent. Your next dose of inspiration about ordinary people doing extraordinary things is just one click away. Because sometimes the most powerful voice belongs to the person who spent years learning when to listen, but who finally found something worth speaking up about, regardless of the personal cost. The world needs more invisible heroes who are willing to become visible when justice demands it. The question is, when your moment comes, will you have the courage to step out of the shadows and prove that the most dangerous enemy is the one nobody sees coming, especially when they've been standing right in front of you all along?